33 and 34 guilty. That is Donald J. Trump, defendant in New York versus Donald Trump, found guilty on all 34 felony counts. That is the verdict here in this case.
This is Dave Life with DaveLifeTV News. Recently, former President Donald Trump was found guilty on 34 felonies related to business fraud. In our last episode, we had Trump supporter and Republican comedian Steve Turner to react to the news. In today's episode, we have Democrat and longtime actor, writer, journalist, and DaveLifeTV News political contributor, Tom Jackson, to give us his reaction to the verdict. Tom, come on to the stage and share your thoughts. How you doing, Tom?
Hi, David. I'm doing great. Good to see you again. Good to be on the show with you again.
Absolutely. Good seeing you. So, Tom, last time, we got a lot of reactions to Steve's interview, and I thought it was a really good interview to show how a Trump supporter would feel in response to the guilty verdict.
Yes.
I've known you for a while. I know that you are a Democrat, and I know that you are not a Trump supporter. Am I correct?
You are absolutely correct.
So, Tom, I would like for you to, as we just go through some points here, I'd like you to first just, what's your reaction to Donald Trump, a former president, being found guilty on 34 felonies related to business fraud?
And I got to tell you, it is not just the 34 business-related felonies. The fact was he did this in an effort to alter the outcome of the election. He wanted to make sure that the news that they were stifling with the National Enquirer and David Pecker was not out while the election had not yet been done. They wanted to make sure that voters didn't get a chance to see the news that this would make, his having an affair with Stormy Daniels, with paying her more than $100,000 for it, the amount that had to be paid to another young woman who I believe was a Playboy playmate that he had had an affair with. They were quashed. Now, the thing was, the value of the payments to stifle those stories amounts to campaign contributions. It has to be submitted and announced to the FEC, and that's what makes it an even greater crime. That's what makes it a felony. He didn't just commit business fraud by falsifying the records. He committed it in the course of trying to cover up these stories that would have made a difference conceivably in the election. When you realize that Trump had lost the election by 3 million votes and that fewer than 100,000 votes separated Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the states in those decisive states, it could very well have made the difference in the election, and he would have cheated in order to win the presidency in 2016.
I didn't know there was another person that he paid. So why didn't this person testify, or did they?
She did. She did. Karen McDougal. She was Playmate of the Year in 1998. Playmate of the month of December 1997. She had alleged, they say, 9-month-long affair with Donald Trump before he became the Oval Office occupier, and she was also paid. She testified at the trial. She was one of the reasons he got convicted.
Okay, so Tom, do you believe that the guilty verdict will prevent him from becoming the Republican candidate? Do you believe that the guilty verdict can or should prevent him from becoming the president? Or do you think that there's a possibility that he could still run and win the presidency?
While I do believe that many states have bylaws that prevent them from having a convicted felon as the nominee for their state, as like I believe the Vermont Republican Party has a law of that kind. Texas, I believe, has a law of that kind. And I guarantee you that, especially in Texas, they'll find a way around those laws in order to get Donald Trump on the ballot. It seems to be the case that they're making all sorts of exceptions for Donald Trump, things that he should have been left off the ballot. In Colorado, for example, the Supreme Court ruled actually unanimously that he should be on the ballot. Now that he's a convicted felon, I'm wondering if they ought to revisit that. I don't have a law degree. I'll have to ask all my friends who are lawyers if that is the case. But in any case, yes, I do believe he can be on the ballot. Do I believe he can win? Probably. I'll be honest. I don't think so. I personally think that the polls are skewed.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to poll people who answer their landlines. I don't know how many landlines there are left at least in my neighborhood. Not a lot. I also believe that the sampling they take, they try to find a 50-50 balance where I don't believe it is 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats. I believe that the media does really like having this kind of horse race element, having liberal Democrats kind of up in arms over the possibility that Trump is doing extremely well. I think, as we have found in recent years, whenever any kind of initiative is on the ballot, for example, for abortion rights, or even other just Democrat versus Republicans in special elections, we are finding there are overwhelming victories on the part of the Democratic candidates. I don't think the polls accurately reflect what the mindset and spirit of the country is. So personally, I don't think he's going to win. We have to vote, though. We cannot be complacent, because we do have to make it overwhelming, because I also believe that the Republican Party is going to claim that some kind of nefarious activity has been performed by the Democrats, and that they're going to do the same kind of thing that happened in 2020.
Yeah, the recount. Remember the whole recount with Bush and Gore? The
Good Lord.
added and divided ballots and throw these out and the recount. Yeah. So, Tom, you said that in watching the last interview, you noticed some typical, what you call, right-wing tropes that Steve mentioned. So some of them you said you wanted to address. So in particular, that America should be run as a business. So can you speak to some of those? You say it's typical things that the right wing throws out there as criticisms of the Democratic Party, or things that are in support of Trump. So can you give me your take on some of those right wing tropes?
Absolutely. The idea that America should be run like a business. I got to tell you, I am a capitalist. I firmly believe in the free enterprise system. And for that very reason, that's why the government should not be run as a business. What is the product or service that that United States, that the government would provide? Are the people, are the citizens, the customers? Are we the employees? I mean, given the whole idea of business is designed to generate income, how does America get that money? I mean, I know it's not by taxes, because let's face it, the Republican Party is so anti-tax. They want to get rid of the IRS. They want to cut taxes completely, at least for the folks who make the most money. And, how do we make the money? Do we sell stuff? Okay, that would require the government to be a manufacturer. So we do have a government running the business. I mean, sure, that sounds like something Russia or China would do, because they, government-run businesses. It's that's what they do. That is not what the Constitution of the United States. If you go back to the originalists, which I know, for example, the Federalist Society is big on, going back to what the Constitution originally outlined, it is not that we are a business.
But if America were a business, would you pick Trump to be the CEO of that business, or would you pick someone else?
That's laughable, because he's probably the worst businessman in history. I mean, he was given a few $100 million by his own father, and he took that and produced 6 bankruptcies with it. He is probably the only human who has ever owned a casino on the planet who not only lost money doing it, but had to go bankrupt doing that. And meanwhile, any successes he's had, such as, basically anything he's done has proven to be fraudulent. The recent ruling by the state of Illinois, state of New York, his corporation was charged with felony fraud when that was when Alan Weisselberger got convicted and was sent to prison, which is where he still is. So there's one example where he wasn't successful. He had to cheat to look like he was making money. Look at Trump University. He had to settle. He settled. Even as he was saying, "Oh, I don't settle on anything. I always win my law cases." No, he had to pay, I think it was $25 million in claims to people who were defrauded by the Trump University. And you remember that? I mean, that was right before the election in 2016. And he somehow managed to win. Meanwhile, he keeps committing libelous acts, having to pay tens of millions of dollars. To E. Jean Carroll, for example, he got sued twice because he wouldn't shut up after the first time he was ordered to pay. He lost, I think, $5 million in the first case, another $83 million in the second case. It's because he won't shut up. And just recently, he's continued to speak ill of E. Jean Carroll and lying about the relationship between the two of them. And so there's a good chance he's going to get sued a third time. Then, of course, that, as I mentioned earlier, that great big lawsuit against it by the state of New York, where he has to owe like almost $500 million.
Yeah, I remember that one. That was recent.
Yes. And so, I mean, is this the kind of CEO you want? The guy can't shut up. He always says he continues to defraud the actual American people who are either his customers or his employees if he's running a business. No. Right. And there's a reason. And he didn't know how to deal. He had absolutely no idea how to deal with COVID. 1 million people died of COVID alone, just of COVID. And then you have the untold hundreds of thousands who no doubt died because they weren't able to get prompt enough health care in the hospitals because they were overfilled with COVID patients. My father was one of those who died that way. He was in the hallway of an overfilled hospital and died of cardiac arrest.
I'm sorry.
So I take it personally. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can understand that. Wow. Sorry for your loss. I can understand why you would take that one personally. Well, I'd like to ask this question. What about one of the claims that was made in the last interview that the Democratic Party was historically the party of slavery and racism? Now, I'll tell you, as a black man that's been a Democrat my whole life, my family's been Democratic. Of course, I wanted to look into that. There's a lot of details related to that. But with you being a white man in America and a Democrat all of your life, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes.
How do you respond to the claims that the Democratic Party was historically the party of slavery and racism, historically?
It was. I mean, if you look back then, Jefferson Davis, the guy who was president of the Confederacy, he was probably a Democrat before they broke off and tried to become the Confederate States of America. You got to go back 160 years for that. You got to remember the longest serving president, FDR, he was a Democrat who sought to make all Americans thrive, especially right after the Depression through the New Deal, which helped the downtrodden, especially minorities and immigrants, and the Democrats who were remnants of the Dixiecrat South had slowly been moving away from the Democratic Party because of this. However, the majority of these folks who went from Democrat to Republican did so after LBJ, another Democratic president, saw the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1968. And in short, these racists were Democrats until they realized they can get their racism on better as Republicans. And they have been so ever since.
So you feel there was a party switch where
yes,
the racists moved and changed sides over to Republican?
Absolutely. Just take a look. I mean, here's the other thing. If you were to, we do have neo-Nazis. They're actually far more vocal and visible than ever. Other white supremacist groups, even the Ku Klux Klan, they have become much more visible. They've become much more outspoken, and they are overwhelmingly in favor of Trump. They much prefer the Republican Party. If that doesn't tell you something, well.
Yeah, and I made that point also to Steve, that I felt that racism was more open during the Trump presidency
Yes.
than it has been in a long time, probably since the
Oh
60s
yeah.
or 70s. We can do a whole show on that. So
I know.
I don't want to dig.
And we should.
We probably should.
We
I don't want to
should.
dig too deep, but I do want to read here that the Democratic Party. I'm reading in Wikipedia. The Democratic Party was founded in 1828 by Martin Van Buren of New York. He played a central role in building the coalition of state organizations that formed a new party as a vehicle to elect Andrew Jackson of Tennessee.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party is often called the world's oldest active political party, the party that supported expansive presidential power, and get this, the party that supported the interests of slave states.
Yeah.
So again, they did support the interests of slave states in the beginning, but your position is that changed at some point.
Yes. And if I were a citizen of this very city I'm in back in the late 1850s, you better believe I'd be a Republican. I would be supporting Abraham Lincoln. He would have an office not very far from me right now, about 15 miles away from where I am sitting right now. I would have been a very strong Republican at that time.
Correct, because they supported the free states.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. What, in your opinion, because we've talked offline with a few people, what's, in your opinion, the pros and cons of today's Democratic Party? And just some bullet points to kind of set you up for you to give us your response. Some things that were mentioned were that the Democratic Party is too willing to compromise with Republicans, that they try to be the party of the people and try to help everyone. These are pros and cons. That the Democratic Party makes too many concessions, or they're too afraid to offend people. And in contrast, the Republican Party is the party of the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And that the Republican Party is better at going scorched earth or going low. And the Democratic Party, as Michelle said, we're encouraged to go high. So just give me your take on what are some of the pros and cons of today's Democratic Party.
Well, I think you've heard the old saying that taking a knife to a gunfight is, not a smart idea. Well, I do feel as though the Democratic Party tends to do that. I do believe that they try to adhere to proper decorum that had been established for the last 240 years of this nation's existence. Now, the fact is, it has not always been civil discourse in the halls of Congress. There have been people attacking others with wooden canes and leaving people bloodied and unconscious. But over the course of time, the rules, the decorum, the protocols have been established. So we got to a point where, yes, we can have these very civil debates on various laws, realize where they do not agree and try to come to a good compromise. The only problem is, since about, and I will put this back at Reagan, the Republican Party has essentially made some degree of bigotry the primary driver of their policy. And that has been especially rough. I mean, the fact that they have that, for example, the Roberts Court has essentially gutted much of the Civil Rights Act is one. They've taken away affirmative action, where they say they claim affirmative action is what gets it allows people of other races who aren't as qualified to have jobs. It's not that at all. What it allows is those minorities who are actually better qualified to actually be considered instead of simply being dismissed.
Opportunity.
Exactly.
The playing field. Yeah.
Exactly. And I guarantee you, and you know this, I know, the minorities have to work harder to get the recognition that those of my particular demographic get inherently.
And the statement is you have to work twice as hard than someone else of a different race, specifically the white race, right? That's what they say. And I find that to be true. And I'm gonna tell you what else. When you're a person of color, African American, Latino American, what have you, Native American, right? When you're a person of color, you can't make mistakes.
No,
you make one mistake, you don't get the grace and mercy everybody else gets.
exactly.
So affirmative action is super important.
Yes. Now, just to continue, I'm sorry, but the thing is, though, this is such a policy position by the Republicans that it becomes the primary driver of all that. And in order to be that conciliatory, to come together and make those compromises, the Democratic Party essentially has to agree to some of those, I will say it, bigoted policies. It might be just a little bit racist, but it's got racism in it. We know that this is what they do. We saw how, the gutting of the Civil Rights Act, the gutting of affirmative action, the fact that, I'll be honest, the Federalist Society seems intent on striking down any of the any equal white rights related amendments.
Yeah.
And more, even more on that, as you mentioned before we started the recording, we didn't talk about, you mentioned the Project 2025.
Yeah, but before we get to Project 2025,
we'll get to that.
Roe versus Wade was just repealed.
Yes.
Women's right to choose.
Yes.
To me, it's like they want to go backwards. And look, I'm trying to be impartial. This is your interview. This is your take. But just as a black man in America, I look and I say, we had to fight for civil rights, the right for black people to vote. We had to fight for women to have the right to vote. We had to fight for women to have the right to choose whether they were going to have an abortion or not. Now they want to make it illegal.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense.
And Republicans just yesterday voted to not, they would not allow the right to contraception be a nationwide law. They voted yesterday. The Republicans shot down, and I'm like, okay, so they're getting rid, and that should not be a surprise, because on the Dodd ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade, Clarence Thomas, at the end of his majority opinion, stated that the next ones they're going to go after are the one that allowed contraception, and so we know that's where they were going in the first place.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about Project 25, because you brought this up on the episode of the After Dark podcast where we discussed Trump and we discussed Diddy, and you brought up Project 25. So I'm going to read a little bit about Project 25 for those people that don't know. Project 25 is a project that, if I'm not mistaken, and you can tell me more details, a group, a fundamentalist / Republican group envisions widespread change across the government, particularly in economic and social policies, especially in the areas of slashing funding for the Department of Justice, dismantling the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, reducing environmental change regulations, eliminating the Department of Commerce. It goes so far as to even want to abolish the Department of Education, reject abortion as health care, eliminate the Affordable Care Act's coverage of emergency contraception, infuse Christianity into the government, almost like not separating church and state. And as a Christian, I even understand why you separate church and state. But this group wants to kind of merge it, and then they want to remove protections against discrimination based on sexual or gender identity. They want to terminate diversity and inclusion programs, and they're already working on terminating affirmative action. These are all initiatives that Project 25 is pushing. So tell me your take on Project 25.
Well, it's done by the Federalist Society. They're the ones who basically provided these extremely right-wing radical judicial candidates to Trump, who rubber stamped them, sent them to the Senate, and of course the Republicans. Remember, Trump had the Senate and the House, as well as the White House. So basically, they could do whatever they wanted, and they would rubber stamp those Federalist Society judges. Now, despite that, you saw that some of the 2020 election stealing claims were still rejected by some of those Trump judges because they saw the facts, they saw the actual truth of the situation. But you do have many judges on the panels who are holding things up, such as Cannon in Florida with his the classified documents stealing case of Trump's. And basically, the Supreme Court claiming that they're looking at full immunity for anyone who held the office of president, or at least for Trump. So these are the people who are making the worst recommendations, the worst ideas. They're essentially trying to get rid of all amendments that provide equal rights to women, to other races, even to folks who do come to the country from others. And they're just a very scary organization. Project 2025 is essentially an outline for a Christian authoritarian state. If you've watched The Handmaid's Tale, that's what they're trying to build. That's what they're trying to get. And it will happen if they get Donald Trump in office.
So the idea is that you get Trump back in office in 2025. You have the Senate, you have Congress. A lot of the Supreme Court justices were already his appointees.
Yes.
So through all of those groups colluding together, Project 2025 can be, it's
massive.
It's almost like Order 66 in Star Wars.
Exactly.
Yes,
something that's scary.
Right.
Exactly. Something that horrific and scary. Here's the other irony of that. They the Republicans made a huge deal out of the alleged claim of the left being defunding the police. But Project 2025 wants to defund the FBI. It wants to defund the Department of Justice. I mean, these are the police. They want to get rid of law altogether. And we've already established that they have zero respect for the rule of law. They are refusing to acknowledge that actual laws were broken by Donald Trump in any of these other, he's got 34 convictions of the 88 charges against him that are felonies. And the reason why they're only postponing all of these other trials rather than actually going to court with them is because they know the same thing's going to happen that happened in New York last week, that he is going to lose because the facts are the facts. And the fact is Trump is a lifelong criminal. And he didn't just start committing these crimes when he got into the office of president. He committed these crimes obviously before with the Stormy Daniels case. He has been sued successfully by so many others for example, refusing to rent spaces out to African Americans back in the 70s. He is just and frankly, anyone who has lived in New York and has done business in New York in the last 45 years knows that Donald Trump was a joke. He was no king of business. He was a joke. And he's a criminal. And the idea that they want to try to install him as he's going to be a figurehead because he is losing his mental capacity by the day, but he will be what they call a useful idiot.
Okay, so one last question, Tom, before we conclude the interview.
Thank you.
Another point that was brought up was the idea of black conservatives or blacks that are now supporting Trump, right? Trying to get the black vote from the Democratic Party, where it's been historically, and moving it over to the Republican Party via Trump. So give me your take on the idea that the Republican Party will, I guess, there's big money in trying to get black people over to their support, and specifically black people that will criticize the Democratic Party. Can you speak to that idea that the Republican Party is paying people to I guess, convert?
Yes. Elie Mystal posted on Twitter this morning that there is good money in African Americans turning Republican talking crap about the Democratic Party, and essentially trying to convince other members of their community to follow them. And the fact is, yes, I know from experience that the values of certain minority groups, African Americans, Hispanics, they're very Christian, very religious, and frankly, they're much more conservative than your typical liberal voter, such as my typical white liberal voter. So it would seem like there is an opportunity. However, there's still too much racism in the base of what the Republican Party wants to do. And so when they're able to actually find someone Hispanic or an African American who's willing to jump over to the Republican Party, they consider it kind of like a unicorn, as it were. So they're willing to do all they can to fund them. It can be very lucrative. They can, sell out their particular community in order to benefit from the spoils of being on the party that has a whole lot of very rich people throwing money at them. You can look at Byron Donalds, who has become a somewhat prominent member of the House of Representatives. I think he's out of Florida. He made mention of the fact he believes that, for example, African American families were better off under Jim Crow.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was like, I can't believe we've got, any intelligent black person, especially in politics, that would feel that the Jim Crow South was good for black folks. That's hard to believe, man.
He claimed that they voted more conservatively then, but the whole point of Jim Crow was they cannot vote.
We didn't have the right to vote, so therefore,
not until '68.
And this is getting back to the whole idea of tropes that are thrown out there. And I want to say this to all of the followers of DaveLifeTV News: do your research. Lifers, do your research. That's all I can say. I don't want to sway you one way or the other, but I do want you to do your research, because Tom has an opinion, and just to counter, I guess, juxtapose him to Steve. Steve has an opinion. You can see voters feeling one way, you can see voters feeling another way. You may have your own opinion. I have my own opinion. What I want you guys to do is do your research. Everything that's brought up on DaveLifeTV News, do your research, look it up, start the conversation. Don't turn a blind eye, and for God's sakes, do not sit out here and not get involved. Go vote.
Absolutely.
Tom, anything before we close it out? I want to make sure you've covered all of your points today in reaction to the Trump guilty verdict, in reaction to the Democratic Party being criticized heavily in the last interview, in reaction to the Republican Party possibly trying to pull the black vote. Go ahead and just give us a summary, and then I'll let you go.
Again, the Democratic Party is not perfect. I do believe it has been kind of soft when it comes to messaging. I don't think it has been forceful enough in getting its message out, which is a far superior message and far more truthful than what the opposition has been putting out there. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump has told 30,000 plus lies over the past 8 years. Now, I bet you it's double that, because I think the 30,000 was just during his years in the White House. But and the fact that his party still completely supports him, and in many cases parrots the same lies, which is very upsetting. Look it up. We do have a binary choice. It's either going to be the Republican or the Democrat. If you don't vote for the Democrat, it's going to help the Republican, and that's Donald Trump, and that's going to hurt us all. Look, my dad died because of Donald Trump being in the White House. Let's not let this happen to anyone else. Do your homework. Ask me questions if you want, but do vote. Find out the facts and vote accordingly.
So, Tom, one last question before I let you go. Being that you're a Democrat and you're saying we should vote and the Republican Party isn't the right party, what makes the Democratic Party the right party? I know they're not perfect. So how do you feel about Biden? How do you feel about Kamala Harris and just voting Democrat?
Absolutely. I know that Kamala Harris has gotten a lot of criticism through the last 4 years, and I actually have no idea why, because she has essentially performed as well or better as any other vice president in recent memory, at least in my lifetime. I honestly think the criticism stemmed from a combination of misogyny and racism. She's a woman of color. So I think she's done a great job. Frankly, I was supporting her in the primary process 4 years ago, or yeah, it was 4 years ago. So my other point about Biden is that he is a good man. He has made mistakes. He's made mistakes his entire political career. He's one of the main reasons Clarence Thomas wound up being approved for the Supreme Court. He did not treat the hearings, and I'm trying to remember the woman who testified in the hearings. Anita Hill, thank you so much.
Anita Hill, I remember.
I'm an old man, and did not treat her with I felt the respect she deserved. He has certainly improved his my opinion of him. I think he continues to try to improve. He doesn't see himself as the perfect person. He is a devout Christian. He goes to church more frequently than I think any president, probably in the last 50, 75 years at least. He is always trying to serve the people of America. He is a true man of the people. He actually walked a picket line with members of a union. You know, that was his upbringing. He was not a rich man growing up. He lived in a poor household in Pennsylvania and Delaware, and his family were strong union folks. That's my background as well. Especially on my mother's side, very much a proud union family.
Yeah.
So I think that he deserves, and he's done an amazing job. You can't dispute the numbers. People will try to dispute the numbers, but when they actually look at the numbers for the economy, well, just today we had another 270,000 new jobs. Good Lord.
Tom,
he's done an amazing job.
As a black man and as a black voter, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the criticisms of Biden is that in the past, he voted along the lines of segregation type. You know, he didn't want his kids going to school with black kids. The whole thing with Kamala Harris when she was Attorney General in California and put a lot of black people in jail.
Yeah.
And the Clintons supporting the mass prison system and Biden being a part of that as well back in the day.
Yeah.
So there's criticisms of both white and black politicians, but we're talking about Biden and Kamala Harris. There's criticisms, man. Should black people forgive? Should black people forget? Should black people not forgive, not forget, and just say, I'm going to remember that? I mean, I understand it's a binary choice.
Sure.
Is it now the choice of the lesser of two evils? What do you say to all of that?
There's a reason Barack Obama selected him as his vice president. It's because Joe Biden has the capacity to listen, to learn, to grow. And he has done so. He did so in the 8 years he served as vice president. He did that in the decades he served in the Senate before that. He has gotten to the point where, I mean, you got to remember, Kamala Harris forgave him enough to be on his ticket. She did.
And one major point that I will give credit to Steve Turner, the last guest. He said that Kamala Harris called Joe Biden a racist during the primaries, and then she backed off of it. And I remember her saying that, so that has been a criticism, but I will give you credit that people can grow. And I do think that under Barack Obama, you can't have racist policies and be a racist when you're under Barack Obama, the first black president. And I know some people will get upset. They'll say Obama didn't do enough for black people. Obama did that. That's a whole nother episode. The discussion of what Obama was able to do and not do based on the Senate and the House and what he dealt with politically. So we can discuss that. But your response to to the idea that Kamala Harris didn't support him originally and called him a racist, but then she kind of backed off of it. And
I supported Kamala Harris originally. So, she was my original choice, and she's who I voted for in the Illinois primary. So, again, it's a matter of the fact we have seen Joe Biden listen. We've seen him grow. We've seen him actually wind up to the left even of Barack Obama when he was vice president. He is a progressive. He progresses. He does not try to take away rights. He tries to add rights. He tries to restore rights. He has learned from his mistakes, and frankly, he's smart enough to realize when he's made them. And frankly, like I said, you can't argue with the results so far of how the country has improved. Inflation is down.
yeah,
It is. And our standing with other nations has vastly improved.
I would agree with that. Yep, our international policy. Yep.
Yeah. And employment is great. My 401k looks better than it ever has.
We still need these gas prices to get a little bit lower, though.
Yeah.
They've gone down, but we need them to.
Yes, they have.
And I know there's more investment in electric vehicles and things like that. All right, one last question, and this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek question.
Sure.
Man, is Biden really sleep all the time? You think he's too old to be doing this? Or well, we need to get him some caffeine or something. What do you think about his age? I know Donald Trump is not a spring chicken either. So how do you feel about the idea that Joe is a little older?
Well, I'll tell you what. I believe Clint Eastwood was directing movies, and he's on the other side of the political spectrum. He's been directing movies, I think, until he's in his 90s still. I think he's about 90 or so. He was directing movies. He was in his movies. He can get it done. So from a right-wing standpoint, they can't complain about what he's doing. When is he sleeping? I remember seeing video today of one of the, I think, 98-year-old World War II vets approaching him and saying, "When do you sleep?" And just like that, Joe responded, "When the media isn't watching." I mean, the guy's sharp. The guy's funny. That's a great answer.
All righty. Yeah. All right. So he's aware. Yes,
he is.
In other words. Okay.
Yes.
Tom Jackson, thank you for joining. I really appreciate your insight for joining Dave Life TV News. Make sure you come back and give us updates as more of this Trump story develops. I really appreciate your time, Tom.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure talking with you, David. I love it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Take care.
So that was Tom Jackson, our political contributor for Dave Life TV News. I want you guys to make sure that you follow Dave Life TV and subscribe on YouTube and all platforms. And make sure you keep it locked to Dave Life TV for all of your news updates on Diddy, on Trump, and any other developing stories. This is Dave Life for DLTV News. I appreciate you guys. Peace.